So I have a question. Is there research that suggests a patient can develop resistance to botulinum toxin over time, and so that they might still have characteristic breaks even though they've been treated for adductor spasmodic dysphonia? It's very rare for someone to develop resistance to botulinum toxin because the dosages are so small that are used for treating adductor spasmodic dysphonia that they are not large enough to cause antibodies to develop. So that is a relatively rare instance that can occur. However, there have been a handful of cases reported in the literature about that. More likely, what happens is people stop responding to Botox to the same degree that they did previously. And so they may develop some breathiness but also still have breaks. And usually the best thing to do when that occurs is, first of all, to test to see if they have developed antibodies, but also to try injecting botulinum toxin in a somewhat different way. That is, going to different muscles or going to one side rather than injecting both sides. And people have found that the disorder seems to adapt to the effects of botulinum toxin over time, and by readjusting and changing the injection approach, sometimes people can again get benefit. Another question, what role anxiety and psychological issues play in people diagnosed with spasmodic dysphonia? I showed you a study that showed that probably what's happening is that the disorder is causing more problems with anxiety and depression, but not that anxiety and depression are part of spasmodic dysphonia. Are there any research to suggest that botulinum toxin treatments are administered more accurately when a physician uses a laryngoscope to guide the tip of the needle into the proper section of the larynx? There are many, not many, but there are at least 3 different approaches that otolaryngologists use to administer botulinum toxin. And usually when somebody was trained with one of those 3 techniques, they've developed a lot of skill in using that technique, and they may be best in using that technique. So otolaryngologist A may have first learned to do the injections using EMG monitoring, and they are better able to do that using EMG monitoring. Somebody else, otolaryngologist B, may have learned to do it visually with having somebody else hold a scope so they can see where the needle goes into the vocal fold. And so they need better skilled because they were trained doing that and have a lot more experience doing that. And then other people may go through some of the cartilages using what's known as the point touch technique. And because they were trained and have a lot of experience in doing that, they're best to use that technique. The bottom line is, whatever a physician is most experienced at, and you really want to go to somebody who's experienced in doing botulinum toxin injections, but whatever technique they have been using the most is probably the best for you to have them use, because they don't want to be switching techniques when they've developed and are very experienced and very skilled at using one technique. Okay, I have some questions about the SLAD surgery. Somebody had the SLAD surgery. They'd also been using Botox and had stopped being responsive to Botox, and so they had used MyoBlock, which is another form of botulinum toxin, for several years. And then they found that their voice seemed to stay better, and that they didn't need any more injections for at least a year. And we've seen that happen in patients with spasmodic dysphonia. They sometimes can have, after being treated several times, they sometimes can have a long benefit from a treatment that can go several years. But often we find that when these people life happens and they have more things happen to them, that sometimes the symptoms come back, and they may have the symptoms of spasmodic dysphonia again. So we don't quite understand that. It's not usual for spasmodic dysphonia to go away entirely, but the symptoms can remit for periods, and that can be associated with a particular treatment where the symptoms don't come back for a year or two. But we have followed some of those people and found that the symptoms may eventually come back several years later. So those were the questions that had been submitted beforehand. Now let me see if I can see some questions here. Oh yes, there are lots of questions here. Sorry about that. I didn't see all those. Let me see if I can. I'm having a hard time seeing them. Have many studies been done showing that MMR vaccine and developing muscular attention dysphonia have been related? I have the vaccine when I was in mid-40s against my wishes to go back to college, and felt that it eventually caused my MTD. There's no indication of that in the literature to date, and so I don't think we have any evidence that that might be the case. In fact, muscular tension dysphonia is thought to be more of a voice use problem rather than a neurological disorder. Okay, I have another question. Would you kindly discuss the denervation reinnervation group of surgeries that are being used to address the ADSD variety of spasmodic dysphonia? I don't do those surgeries, but I have reviewed, because I'm a speech pathologist, obviously, most of the studies on the surgeries were done by Dr. Burke and his group, who developed the surgeries, and they went back and asked their patients how they were doing several years later, and they found that some of the patients were doing fine and didn't need any more treatment. They found other patients needed to have botulinum toxin injections added to that, and over time, so they still needed some botulinum toxin injections in addition to the surgery. They found a few cases where the symptoms might have gotten worse, and they have found a few cases where the symptoms have returned. As I showed in one of the studies that was done by Dr. Tanner, she found that 45% reported benefit from the surgery. What we do know is that it is most effective in people who have just adductor spasmodic dysphonia and have reported previous benefit from botulinum toxin. It's more helpful in women than in men. The data suggests that men sometimes have too much breathiness after the surgery, and it's not effective usually for people with other voice disorders such as tremor or abductor spasmodic dysphonia. So hopefully that's addressed that question. Let's see what else I can see here. Trying to get to the top here. Using voice frequently was addressed, but there is any connection with spasmodic dysphonia and not using the voice as a possible muscle weakness? No, there is no suggestion that not using the voice will lead to spasmodic dysphonia. Most patients with spasmodic dysphonia do not have vocal muscle weakness. In fact, they tend to have more muscle strength in the laryngeal muscles than most folks. So there's nothing in the literature that I know that suggests that. Next question. In generalized dystonia, how important is it to get botulinum toxin injections on the same day? I have spasmodic dysphonia and blepharospasm along with tremors, including internal, I don't quite get that, including taking medications and getting injections, but I'm unable to coordinate the same day injections with providers. I've been told it's a problem not to get the injections on the same day. What are your thoughts or suggestions? We don't have any evidence that it makes any difference to not have, if you have like eye involvement and you're having the eyes treated by an ophthalmologist, say, and you're having your voice disorders such as spasmodic dysphonia treated by an otolaryngologist. It's certainly more convenient if you can go to one place and get the 2 injections, but there doesn't seem to be any indication that it makes any difference in treating the eyes and treating the voice, whether they're done on the same day or different days. In my experience, I haven't seen any difference about that. The next question I answered. Have any, the next question I've also answered. How can I become a part of a study group? Yes, that's a very good question. I think Kim Kuhlman at the NSDA can give you the contact information for the principal investigators for many of the studies. I mentioned the group, Project 3. Those are 4 different centers. We can certainly give you the contact people at each one of the centers, and Kim Kuhlman can do that at the NSDA coordinators, the NSDA headquarters. Also, she has the address and contact information for Christina Simenon, who's recruiting people in the New York area for her studies on brain function and genetic abnormalities.
And
next question.
Yes? We also have information listed on our website for current clinical trials, too. So people can go to www.dysphonia.org for more information. Under the research section, there's a tab called Clinical Trials.
Very good. Okay. Next question. I guess we have time for 1 or 2 more questions. Kim, is that right?
Sure, we can take a few more, and then we can wrap up.
Okay. Is there a specific pathology of patients with spasmodic dysphonia? There isn't an answer to that. That's what many of the studies are looking at. They're looking at brain abnormalities. They're looking at genetic abnormalities. We do have some indication that there might be a sensory abnormality or a response in the brain that's abnormal. There's looking for genes right now in spasmodic dysphonia. Haven't reported any yet, but there's probably going to be some identification in the near future. Next question. The reported success rate from doctors referring to the SLAD surgery seems to be far off from the results on other reports, 90% success rates versus 40%. Are there plans to do more follow-up on patients undergoing SLAD surgery? And I think that's a very good question. That's one of the reasons that we're doing Project 3, because we want to have an instrument that can measure the severity of spasmodic dysphonia so that we could follow patients and compare patients who have been treated by the surgery with patients who have been treated by botulinum toxin. So that's right on. I think that's a very important study for everybody, for patients to be able to decide what they want to elect as their treatment. Next question, is there evidence that suggests that the TA muscles are more involved in adductor spasmodic dysphonia than the LCA muscles? That's a great question. There isn't evidence. It probably is that we know that more than one muscle is involved in most patients with spasmodic dysphonia. In fact, they show several muscles are involved, and it may be that patients have different degrees of involvement of the different muscles, but there doesn't seem to be a definite pattern. Some people like to give injections closer to the LCA muscles, but there hasn't been a systematic study of whether TA injections or LCA injections really make that much difference. There was a small study done by Ford at University of Wisconsin, but we still need some more evidence. Okay, the average dose of Botox for SD treatment, there isn't one. There's a huge range, and that's another thing that we need to do more research on. Why are some people getting very small injections and doing well, and other people seem to need much larger injections? Okay, I think we're about ready to stop since it's 8 o'clock. Is that right, Kim?
Yes, we do have the other questions, and we will try to get those answered and posted on our website over the coming days and such. And we will also have a link for this webinar if you'd like to review it again. Thank you, Dr. Ludlow, for your time tonight and for giving a wonderful presentation and an overview on the current spasmodic dysphonia research. And thanks to all who attended this evening. We hope that this was informative and useful, and we hope to do webinars in the future.